We're going across to the United Nations, where we're going to get a briefing on the humanitarian situation on the ground in Gaza.
We're all somehow involved in this. On the 7th of October, and I have had the, again, privilege of seeing some of the recordings of these events. Hamas launched an attack that claimed the lives of more than 1,400 people in Israel and injured thousands. This death toll is more than 3 times the cumulative number of Israelis killed since OCHA began recording casualties in 2005. And it was a shocking sight. 240 hostages remain held somewhere, hidden, following this attack. I would like you to listen to a recording we made of a conversation I had with the families, the conversations with some of the hostage families. Can we listen to that now? Is that on? No? Too difficult? No. Let me carry on. I had the opportunity, let me just describe it a little bit in my own words, although, of course, their words are so much more powerful. We had the opportunity in Jerusalem to meet the representatives, very, very young teenagers, people in their early 20s, about 3 or 4 or 5 families, many of whom had still lost many of their relatives. And they pointed at me and they said, "You are also responsible to do something about this, to try to find those people we have lost, to try to find if those people that we've lost are still alive, and to try to find ways of bringing them back. You are also responsible." And I sat there thinking whether this was the time for me to describe the OCHA mandate or not, ludicrously. Of course I didn't. And we talked about the work of courageous organizations like ICRC and MSF and others who are doing their best. But the truth is, these people are still lost. And the truth is that we hear news each day of more of them dying or being killed. So for those families who I met, those young people who I met, each day is a day of terrible anxiety, uncertainty, a day where the future might stop. This is their right. This is a humanitarian issue of the highest importance, finding these people and getting them home. In 26 days also, close to 9,000 Palestinians have been killed in the hostilities in Gaza. And God knows how many more there are uncounted under the rubble. As we all know from other places, that the numbers, the real numbers of those dead, only emerge much later when the buildings are cleared, the rubble is taken away, and the bodies of those who've perished become revealed. This total of 9,000 is 4 times as many deaths as during the 50-day conflict in 2014, where just over 2,200 Palestinians were killed, 9,000 Palestinians dead from that early day of October 7th. I don't know if we can cue the recording or not of my discussions with... No, we can't. Sorry, nobody hearing me. Shall I start again? Don't worry. I spoke to some of the families in Gaza. I couldn't get in and out of Gaza. And what you would have heard was the story of two families. One family, the father of which was a lawyer, like me, about my age probably, very old, and his house had been destroyed one midnight. And in his house lived the extended family, as is quite common in Gaza. And as he said, he spent that next day or two doing two things: trying desperately to find somewhere to live, and thank God for UNRWA. Thank God for UNRWA, as we will hear more, and from Tom, who is there daily, bravely working. They found some refuge, some safety in a school of UNRWA where they could stay the night, where they're still living. That was the first thing he had to do. The second thing he had to do was, with his own hands, bury 30 members of his family who had been killed that night in the house that now no longer existed. And what you would have heard, and I'm sure you would have been as affected as I was, suddenly an 8-year-old daughter, granddaughter presumably, suddenly interrupted the call, and she said, "I just don't want to die." End of quote. I just don't want to die, that's all. So we have these parallel tragedies. And in my world and in my values, and I think it is true in all our values, one death has the value of all deaths. And one killing is a tragedy in and of itself. And this goes on day by day by day by day. And by the end of my speech, I'm sure the numbers will have changed, all for the worst. Life-sustaining connections into Gaza, which is what so many of us have been focused on in our negotiations, have been all but cut off. A couple of weeks ago, there was a full blackout. Electricity was cut off completely across Gaza. Another one, I think, happened a couple of days ago. And we understand that this will happen from time to time. 14 out of 35 hospitals with inpatient capacities, those who can take people in, are not functioning. As you have heard many of us say, UNRWA, of course, and WHO and MSF in particular, the health system is on its knees. UNRWA, the bulwark, the safety net, the buffer of so many people of Gaza for so many years, is practically out of business. I pay tribute here, as I was going to do later. I don't even know the numbers today, this morning. Yesterday it was 72 killed of UNRWA staff, those brave staff. UNRWA had 14,000 national staff in Gaza at the outset. Many of them fled, but I think 5,000 or so are still working. And I don't know how many are dead now. We'll hear more probably from Tom. One of the terrible things about those killings are that most of them have happened in the homes of those people, and they have been killed with their families.
You were listening to a UN briefing on the humanitarian situation on the ground in Gaza. That was Martin Griffith speaking there, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and the Emergency Relief Coordinator. Listening on set with me was France 24's Angela Diffley. Angela, Martin Griffith's clearly talking about the dire situation on the ground there in Gaza as we speak. And there he said the UN's refugee agency is losing staff constantly. About 70 people have been killed since the 7th of October.
Yes, he was paying tribute there just as we stopped listening to those people working for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which provides permanent assistance to registered refugees within Gaza. They run schools and in some cases, hospitals and other facilities. It's a very specific mission, the UNRWA mission, and they have lost many staff. They have something of a not always straightforward relationship with the Israelis. He mentioned there I think he was trying to put a human face on some of these numbers of people who have died in Gaza, these very high civilian casualties. Earlier today, an officer from the United Nations High Commission for Refugees said that there was serious concern for the respect of distinction and proportionality, those two rules of war. Those are among the rules of war. The IDF, the Israeli army, intends, they say, to stick to the rules of law. That means distinguishing between civilians and non-civilians and retaliating in a proportional way. It is far too difficult in the heat of war to say when rules have not been violated and when they have. That is to be decided afterwards. The Israelis take legal advice and they maintain they are the army of a democracy which will follow the rules. But nevertheless, there is a high number of civilian casualties. To add to that is the worry. Today, some Palestinians were expelled from Israel. About 18,500 Palestinians have work permits to go into Israel, and they have jobs in Israel. Around 4,000 of them, it seems, have been expelled. They were people who found themselves caught in Israel when October the 7th happened, and they are now considered a security risk, and they have been moved into Gaza.
Sent into a war zone.
This is a war. This is a war for Israel. They are a security risk. There are also a smaller number of people Gazans who were patients in Israeli hospitals, who are now in a state of health considered okay to be discharged from hospital. And they too have been returned to Gaza because they too are considered a security risk. This is a war. There is always a humanitarian toll in war, and this man, Martin Griffiths, is there to make real the very real stories of what is happening to adults, children, babies in Gaza who have nothing to do with what happened on October the 7th.
He did say, he mentioned 9,200 officially dead, according to the Gaza's health ministry, and he said, but that number is likely to rise once we see who is actually under the rubble.
Yes, it's true that Israel is fighting a war against Hamas, who maintain no pretense of following the rules of war. We know they have taken hostages, 242 Israeli hostages. That is against the rules of war. They murdered people in their homes, civilians. That is against the rules of war. Israel is up against an outfit which has no intention of following the rules of war. In past conflicts, we know that Hamas has used people as human shields, and we know that they operate under civilian infrastructures which any army would normally like to avoid. So this is an extremely difficult, messy situation for the Israeli army, and the responsibility of Martin Griffiths is to point up the plight of ordinary people who are caught up in this.
Thank you very much for that, Angela Diffley there.